Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
More than 25 years ago, the interview series called Reflections in Time was developed by the late Professor Paul Borghi. It was intended to preserve some of the history of the University of Nebraska at Omaha by recording experiences people who contributed to its development had. With the aid of the UNO Alumni Association, I have continued Paul's work with the series. My name is Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960, and I served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in developing his original interview series, and I continue it as a tribute to him. It's a cold day in December, early in December, years 2006, and I have as my guest here in the studio former Chancellor Nancy Belck. Nancy, it's great to have you with me here this afternoon.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate being asked.
Now, you were here, Chancellor, for 10 years, which is a long time in the history of this university.
But it's only half as long as you were Dean of Arts and Sciences. Yes, it's been a good decade.
Well, let's talk a little bit, if we may, about you personally. I noticed that you had your undergraduate education in Louisiana. Is that the state you came from? And you grew up then in the South.
Yes, I did.
So this cold weather is, well, I guess you've been away from the South long enough now so that it doesn't bother you. But
yeah. Well, Michigan's even further north.
Yes, that's true. So you were at, as an undergraduate at Louisiana Tech.
That's right.
And tell us about that.
Well, I grew up on campus, literally. Both my parents were college professors. And so I spent many an afternoon after the model school that I went to on campus in one or the other of their offices.
And you were in a secondary education teaching program.
I was.
And had your original intention then been to be a secondary school teacher, or?
Well, I knew I was going on for graduate work, so I passed through secondary teaching as a student teaching, and then went on for my graduate degree at the University of Tennessee.
And you, well, I can perhaps understand some of your motivation in graduating with high honors from Louisiana Tech, because with both your parents on the campus, you'd better do well.
That's right.
Yes. Then you went on to Tennessee, as you said, and, but your curriculum changed a bit. You were textile science?
Yes, got a master's in textile science.
How did that fit into your plans?
Well, I had always been very interested in teaching, and I ultimately ended up teaching in the textile science area at Michigan State. And so the secondary education prepared me for teaching, and then the content area prepared for later work.
How did you pick Tennessee?
Well, it was one of the best programs in the country, and I narrowed it down to 3.
Not too far away, just north of Louisiana. So.
Well, it was about a day-and-a-half drive, because it's way East Tennessee, Appalachia.
Yeah, my son had a postdoctoral fellowship there, so I know the campus a bit. Right near the Smokies, and he used to go down to North Carolina to Pisgah National Forest and spend his weekends hiking around down there.
Oh, it's a beautiful area.
Gorgeous area, So you were, then you were awarded a PhD And that was a little farther north.
Michigan State. I just kept
State.
Going north.
Yeah.
And strictly coincidentally, each of the states where I earned a degree, I later went back a number of years later as an administrator.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And I was on faculty at Michigan State all while I got my doctorate.
Ah.
Those were the days you got hired as an instructor by phone.
Right.
And so I was hired to come teach at Michigan State and did so for a number of years.
But your major changed again from textile science to what was the area?
Family, college, and communications. And I think that really is a very eclectic area that brings together a lot of the disciplines. So it was a logical outgrowth as my career developed.
Sure, I suppose that borders a little bit on my field, which is psychology.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It sure does.
And then you got your PhD at Michigan State. Incidentally, I understand that you received awards from all three of those universities as an alumnus or alumni. I've got to get my genders right here, remembering my high school Latin.
Yes, I was really pleased to be honored and get to go back to each campus.
Oh, that's great.
And I went back to Louisiana actually as a provost. I went back to Tennessee as a dean, and then Michigan, I ended up going back to Central Michigan.
Well, let's talk briefly about some of those other positions you've held. What was your first job? Well, your first job you just told me was faculty member at Michigan State, but after that, after your PhD, where was your first job other than Michigan State?
I had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C. and work in the Consumer Economics Institute, and that taught me that I did not want to be a bureaucrat in Washington. I was there a couple of years and enjoyed the Washington, D.C. experience. But I wanted to get back and be with people.
Yeah, I can understand that. I had a little experience in Washington myself, and it can be a heady experience. You're there with all of the big wheels, at least the people you read about in the newspapers.
And the national news is your local news.
Right, that's right.
It is an interesting place to live.
But I wanted to get away from it, and I can understand why you wanted to get away from it, too. Then you went on from there to where?
My next move was University of Arizona, Tucson, where I was an extension director.
Oh, so you're back in the sunny South again.
Yes.
Great.
Of course, that's really more the West.
Yes, but it's warm.
Yes,
That's
it is warm.
Thing.
Nice, beautiful area.
Yes. It should. I should know better than that, because I lived for a while in Kentucky and some other states, and they don't really consider some of those western states the South.
No, they don't. Well, and even East Tennessee, where Knoxville is Appalachia more than South, and Memphis is South.
I sometimes get, I know you've had some experience at Louisiana State, and I sometimes amuse myself by asking people if they know who the first president of that was. And,
and I do not.
Well, you'd be surprised, because it was William Tecumseh Sherman.
Well, I did not know that.
And back in those days, it was known as Louisiana Military Seminary.
Now, I knew that.
And that's where the military comes through. He was a West Point graduate and loved it down there. And, but when the war between the states broke out, he decided he had to leave, much as he would have liked to stay there. Well, we're digressing a little too much there. But I always enjoy doing that, because people would never guess if they didn't know.
And of course, I grew up in North Louisiana, which is very different than South Louisiana.
Yes. And then, you were a few years in Arizona, and then moved back to Tennessee.
These are these repeat places,
earlier, right?
Yes, as a dean there.
Yeah.
And I was 8 years a dean. That's the longest I've been any place other than here into my 10th year. So 8 years.
That was that's a great place to live.
Yes, it is.
As I mentioned, I've been there a number of times, and it's just gorgeous. Then well, tell me a little bit about your experiences there as dean. That was a new sort of job for you.
Well, an extension state leader, you know, that's administrative, responsible for extension programs throughout the state. And so my track in administration had kind of been established by this time. And I really had a good run. I was a part of a reorganization at the University of Tennessee where a number of units moved into what became a College of Human Ecology. And we took a lot of programs from other areas like early childhood education, art and design, leisure studies. And so it was an area of growth going beyond the disciplines I had studied and bringing in a lot of other areas.
Of course, as a dean, you've got to also be concerned with the faculty who are working in your college, and with promotion and tenure and all those sorts of issues that you probably didn't have as much experience with as in the other position.
Well,
that's always that for me was the hardest thing a dean has to do.
Personnel is always hard. Dean, whether you're dean, provost, or chancellor.
Right, right. And then you had some experience in those other jobs too, as you proceeded from your 8-year term as dean to
another deanship.
Another deanship. I
was dean twice on 2 campuses, provost twice on 2 campuses, and this is my second chancellor position I've just completed. So.
You were, let's see, at Louisiana State at Shreveport.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and that was after your Central Michigan experience.
Right. Right. So at Central Michigan, dean of a much larger college that was a third of the university, and again worked with faculty across many, many areas. And I thought that going from the dean of Education, Health, and Human Services at Central Michigan to provost, and I was also provost there, was a bigger leap than going from provost to chancellor.
Oh, really?
Because you go to responsibility for all programs on campus.
Well, I noticed in looking at and talking with you about these positions that most of these universities where you served were in some ways like UNO, in that they were part of a larger system, and they weren't necessarily what's the word?
Well, I think it's about even. University of Tennessee Knoxville was the land grant main campus. Michigan State was the land grant campus.
I was thinking, of course, of Shreveport and Edwardsville, which we haven't gotten to yet.
Right, and those two directly affected my career path of getting into the Metropolitan University movement, going from the land grant to the Metropolitan University.
And that's been I guess a major part of your career, hasn't it?
It has now, and it was a conscious change. I have often told the story. The big land grants, you know, Michigan State, 44,000. Tennessee, when I was there, was about 29,000. And you go from these very large, complex universities that you can hardly turn that ship on a dime, whereas when you get to the Metropolitan University, there's more interaction, engagement with the community, outreach, and that entrepreneurial spirit. And so I really did enjoy being able to move forward a Metropolitan campus in ways that was not a part of the land grant mission.
Well, you know, you and I know what that term Metropolitan University means, but I'm sure some of our listeners don't. Could you tell us a little bit about what a Metropolitan University is?
Oh, I'd be delighted to. It doesn't mean you're just located in a city.
Right.
Because there are many universities in cities that aren't necessarily metropolitan universities. It means the university is a partner with the city, engages with the community, and I like to say you're of the community, not just in it. And it is a movement that started in the early 90s and has really taken hold. And right here at UNO, the Peter Kiewit Institute is an example of what you can do with that metropolitan partnership.
Surely. Well, of course, in terms of interaction with the community, we had the advantage here in Omaha of having been a municipal university at one time, and I think that's a bygone breed.
But it does get you started being a part of the city.
But it certainly requires close interaction with the city. It's hard to believe, but our Board of Regents back in the municipal university days was appointed by the Board of Education of the City of Omaha.
Oh.
And that was, you know, that's a pretty close association.
Yeah, that is. Well, of course, there are not many boards in the country that are totally elected like ours
Right,
either.
that's true.
They tend to be appointed by the governor.
And you can get all kinds of arguments as to whether
Pro
that's
and con.
good or bad.
Yeah.
Right. We won't go into
No.
those. Then we've already mentioned it, but your next job was in Southern Illinois and Edwardsville, and that's just it's right near St. Louis.
It's just across the river,
Right.
and actually St. Louis was very much the metropolitan service area for Edwardsville.
Yeah.
And I was in St. Louis 6, 7, 8 times a week for maybe a breakfast meeting and a later event, because that was the university's metropolitan area.
Mm-hmm. And what was that job like?
That was an interesting job, my first chancellor position, and to go from a relatively small university, LSU Shreveport, and you could learn that city
Right.
very quickly, to the St. Louis metropolitan area. It's one of the most complex areas I've worked. 15 mayors to work with on the Illinois side of the river, and then St. Louis City is separate from North St. Louis, West St. Louis, South St. Louis. And it was one of the most challenging structures to get to know all the stakeholders.
Oh, I can imagine. And as a municipal university, you really had to do that.
Yeah. And 2 governors to deal with, 2 different sets of legislators
Right.
on issues that related to the university.
Yeah.
I said that my second chancellorship, UNO, in 4 months, I was acquainted of what took several years in St. Louis.
Well, that brings us up to UNO.
It does.
And your time here. Tell me something about how you came here. How you I presume you applied for the position.
No,
here?
I didn't.
No?
A search firm came after me.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I got a call one morning about 8 o'clock. Said, we'd like you to come in for the airport interview, the silent phase of the search. A search firm contacted me, not anyone from campus. And I said, well, you know, I'm just not ready to leave SIU. I have some more things I need to do here. And so I think I'll pass. Within 10 minutes, a long-term colleague, Jim Appleberry, somebody listening may know Jim because he was president of ASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, and of course UNO is an ASCU institute. And as president of ASCU, he called me and he said, I've always known you would have opportunities to move, and you've got to get on the train when it's in the station. And you owe it to yourself to go and at least talk to the committee. And that is what got me to UNO. I would say that Jim Appleberry had me go to that airport interview, and then the rest is history after the interview and then the campus discussions.
Well, personally, I'm very glad that it worked out that way.
I am too.
Yeah, we've had, remember, I was on the Faculty Senate Committee that interviewed you when you first came here.
Well, it really was an ideal match. I had gotten a lot of things going at SIU Edwardsville, but I knew that University of Nebraska Omaha was going to have even more opportunity as we were building these town-gown relationships. The Peter Cuban Institute made a big difference.
Yeah, that surely must have, because it's become a very big operation here now. Well, again, maybe some of our listeners don't know about it. Could you tell us something about it?
I'd be delighted to. And I often say in my first 10 days at UN Omaha, I had a significant institution-changing things happen. One was breaking of the ground for the new Peter Kiewit Institute. And we had a great big caterpillar. I don't know if you were at that event. It was a virtual groundbreaking because the institute, titled Information Science, Technology, and Engineering, truly did bring together high-tech and engineering disciplines in a unique way, combining UNL's engineering and technology with UNO's newly formed information science and technology. So it really did give us a wonderful facility, and that groundbreaking, and that would have been August of '97, led to the completion of that building, and now we've got 3 incubator centers down there. We have what everyone calls the bunker, close alignment with Offutt and Stratcom. And then we have housing related to the Peter Kiewit Institute, as well as general housing.
And that certainly was a major, major accomplishment. I give you great credit for it.
My first 6 months I worked exclusively on getting housing. And while under Del Weber's administration, the board had given permission to begin to pursue it, there were still a lot of battles to fight. Not everyone wanted UNO to have housing. Right. And I mentioned 3 institution-changing things that first week. We also got housing going, and that, I think, has done more to change both this university and the 2 prior ones where I got the first housing right on campus. It makes a commuting campus become more residential even for the commuting students. So I think that was significant. And the third thing, you've got the New South campus going up, you've got housing and Division I
We'll
hockey.
have to talk about that too, because I'm very much interested in hearing your role in the development of that part of the situation. I had a little bit to do with the beginning of, well, not the Peter Kiewit Institute itself, but the new college that developed at UNO, because I was acting Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs back when that was first discussed, and all summer long we met every Saturday morning.
I've heard about those meetings.
And that was very interesting. And
Isn't that the group that Jim Suttle
Yes, he chaired the group.
Because he has told me about those Saturday morning meetings.
And he and I sat down and spent many hours talking about it. And as I've been interested in computer science for a long time, and my son has a PhD in computer science, and I used to consult him pretty regularly about what we were trying to do. But that's when we decided to separate computer science from the mathematics department, and I'd been dean when that was established, so I knew the people very well and felt that it was something that was doable. And
change like that's always hard. Out of arts and sciences, you got computer science, and then out of business, MIS, Management Information System.
Yes. But I took the coward's way out, and immediately after that decision was made, I led a group of 14 students to a semester in Europe, and I just avoided being here when all of those things were worked out. I didn't do it deliberately, but it worked out that way, and was probably just as well. Tell me what your first impressions of the campus were when you came here. What did you think of us?
Well, I thought it was a beautiful campus, and of course the North Campus was what we had at that time, and it was very well contained, a little over 90 acres, beautifully landscaped. The buildings all go together. I've been at so many of the larger land-grant campuses where you have structures that were not planned to be integrated. And so I was very impressed with the campus, with the commitment the faculty and staff had to students. And that's why in starting a strategic planning process, and campuses have always planned, as had UNO, but to get the strategic planning process going here, we really did come out of, I think, a very serious lot of discussion to have. We focus on students, we have the highest academic excellence, and we partner and engage with the community. And so those 3 overarching goals came out of that first year or so of strategic planning, and every year I've been here we've had a couple of advances. You've participated in some of those, and that's how we move the institution forward.
Explain
we don't
that
retreat.
Term too, please, because
we don't retreat. You advance. So we have a strategic plan.
I thought our audience ought to know that.
Yes, but it really does make a difference, and I think it got the faculty, staff, students, and community working together, because the last few advances, these 3 or 4 past years, have been well over 200. 290, I think, was one. And for those of you who are not real familiar with advance of this size, you have tables of 10, and we tried to get faculty, staff, students, and community at each table to do the brainstorming and discussion.
Well, had you done something like that in your other positions, or was this new?
I have always been a strategic planner, going back to my University of Tennessee deanship days, when the planning was first starting as strategy thinking. To really, you know, used to strategic planning you thought more of in the business world. But universities started doing it long about there. And George Keller was one of the gurus who wrote the first academic strategy, and he came and really did a good training job of the deans at UT. So from that position on, I've always tried to get a process going where faculty, staff, students will participate in making their university better. And that's what I hope will continue to be a legacy here, of how we really have set goals and set strategies and made some pretty big differences in curriculum and student recruitment. And you know, most importantly, Jack, retention. The one thing that I was concerned about when I came, I was impressed, as I've said, with the campus, with the people, with the community, but our retention rate was unacceptable. Just unacceptable. And so we have worked very hard on retention, and that's all of the faculty and staff and students. And now our retention rate from freshman to sophomore year is up to 72%. Great. And so it's just really conscious.
Now, is part of that, though, that the type of students we had changed a bit?
I don't think that was solely the reason. I think we were just admitting a lot of students and not getting them connected with the university. Now our ACT scores have gone up. It's at an all-time high this past year of 23.4. So it has gone up some, but it wasn't as much a change of the students as it was really for having the intervention that they need to succeed.
I was thinking, too, though, of our emphasis on part-time students before, that's still there, but perhaps not quite as much.
Now, we have fewer students taking more hours, and that is a definite change, and housing was a part of that. But
a great part, and it's just so wonderful to drive through the campus now and see students there at all hours of the day and night.
And as I said, it gives that study group and that campus focus for even the commuting students. And now, having gotten the 3 phases of housing, the first phase on the Dodge Street campus, and then the second phase down on Pacific, and the plan that was approved by the board most recently before I left was to start the housing outgrowth again, adding to the Dodge Street campus, which is they're working on that contract now.
And those are really nice housing facilities.
Yes, they are. And kids today like apartment style.
Right.
No more shared dorm rooms with the Johns down the hall.
Right.
So each complex has, the existing residence halls we have, has 4 bedrooms and then baths in between.
Though there's a little difference, isn't there, on the South Campus with that one?
Yes, the one that's a part of Scott Hall and Scott Conference Center, you still have a front desk there. And so students do have to enter through the front desk, and, but they still have the individual rooms. And
now, how do they like that? Do
they seem to like it. Our campus housing has been so popular that usually sophomores, juniors, seniors want to move out on their own. We haven't had them wanting to move out, and that's why we've had such a shortage of housing, and why I think it is so critical for the university to get this contract worked out and move forward to get that housing built.
Yeah, that's a big job, though, isn't it,
to
get that done?
And again, we've had some resistance along the way.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
Let's just say a variety of folks, but there were concerns. Why would we build more housing at UNO when there were vacant beds at Lincoln and Kearney? And took 5 presentations before the board to document that if students didn't get housing at UNO, they weren't necessarily going to go to Lincoln or Kearney. They were either going to stay in the metro area, live at home, or live in surrounding apartments. So we really had to emphasize students are going to UNO because they want the programs we have to offer and the advantage of partnering with the city, internships, co-op, service learning. So many activities that get students in the community and give them work experience.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was helped by the fact that, well, we are a metropolitan university now with a lot of effort from you and other people.
And I think people realize that. And the fact now that 73% of our students say UNO was their institution of first choice. And that hasn't always been true. In the past, I think it was UNO is a convenient place to go that's close and not expensive. But now, an institution of first choice, 73%, that's, and it gets up in the 90s with its first or second choice.
Yeah, and we have programs that serve students' interests, particularly in applied sorts of positions.
Professional programs.
Yeah, professional programs. Our business college has always been quite good since it got started, but then we added to it the Peter Kiewit Institute and that IS&T College. And
of course education.
And education
we graduate a majority of teachers in the state.
That's right. It's always served Omaha admirably, I'm sure.
And then the College of Public Affairs and Community Service
is one of those. Yeah, I was going to mention
those.
that next. I think I did interview B.J. Reed recently, and we had a great time talking about the growth in that college and how things have changed. I mean, everything from the Aviation Institute being added to... we could talk a little bit about that. Did you have much experience with the Aviation Institute? Or?
Well, I have worked with them, and of course, Brent Boeing has done so much to expand that program so it's nationwide, and you can get a degree program completely online in the aviation management. But CPACS, I think, has its uniqueness. It's the only college in the country that has the exact title it does with this service. College of Public Affairs and Community Service, and I think that has well served as the metropolitan mission has grown.
Everything from Omaha technocrats and politicians to people that work in the police system. It's wonderful.
And of course there are more programs in CPACS that make the top U.S. News and World Report graduate programs. And that's graduate programs, you know, are defined by peers, whereas the undergraduates are just kind of a popularity contest, and they mail out and have presidents and provosts rank them. So it's really nice that we have that many graduate programs that are significant.
Yes, but we as long as we're talking about it, we can't ignore the undergraduate program, like the Goodrich program. That's maybe not unique, but it's certainly unique for these parts.
Well, I think it is a unique program.
Yeah, it's a wonderful program.
It's so successful. We mentioned retention and how you have to get freshman intervention and get them bonded with the campus. And the highest retention rate of any of our students come out of Goodrich.
Yeah, I remember there were some questions about it when it began. And,
well, it's an expensive program.
Well, yes, but there were questions about its academic integrity because it's supplanted some of the courses that were taught in arts and sciences, and the faculty wanted to be convinced that these were really good courses, and they were convinced. And they do a superb job of teaching those students.
Well, one thing I think that happens, and as you were a dean of a College of Arts and Sciences for 20 years, the university starts out very often with most of the programs in arts and sciences. And then as the university grows and matures and becomes more specialized, CPAC split out from arts and sciences.
Yeah, we gave our programs away. And,
fine arts.
And willingly.
Communication. And so then that gives you a professional colleges that still benefit from the arts and science disciplines and background. But having lived through a few of those separations, it's always hard.
Right, yes. Well, you talked briefly about, or you mentioned briefly, I guess you didn't really talk about it, some of your relationships with the central administration in Lincoln. A lot of policies and procedures have to come from central administration. To what extent did they set priorities for you and set procedures that had to be followed on our campus? Or Or did they give you pretty much free rein to do that yourself?
Well, we of course had to follow the Board of Regents policy and
sure.
bylaws.
Yes.
But it's not that different than what you would expect. What UNO's major problems was how we were going to grow and develop as a metropolitan university, not trying to recruit students from
Sure.
Lincoln or Kearney, but we really were carving out our niche. And that's where I found that we had the biggest challenges for moving forward. The housing was a big hurdle, and I'm really glad that's
Sure.
on its way, though the second phase has been delayed now for a year. And it's not the policies and procedures for the academics as much as it is how the university is growing and maturing, and UNO has certainly had the most significant enrollment growth this past decade of any of our institutions, the undergraduate institutions in the state. So I think as we've grown, attracted more students, an institution of first choice, there's some people who might think we're growing a little too fast.
Well, sometimes that's hard to hard for most people to evaluate. I mean, the people, I'm sure, in our audience, for example, because of the way things are counted, counted not necessarily by where you are geographically, but where you are administratively.
Delivery site versus administration
right.
site.
I was trying to avoid those terms, but
that's what everyone calls them.
Right, yes.
Lincoln does deliver courses on our campus just as we do on theirs.
Yeah, and so we get some of our students counted, some of the students in Lincoln counted on our campus, and of course all the engineering students and so on from who are part of a Lincoln program, even though they're doing their coursework in Omaha.
I don't really think that's the big issue, though.
It's confusing sometimes,
yeah.
though.
But students don't worry about it.
No, I don't think so. But in terms of how many students do we have, sometimes it's a little confusing to people who don't know the technical details of it. Right. Well, we've talked about some of the major changes you've seen, the residence halls being a big part of it, and some of the. Let's talk about. Let's go back to talking about that South Campus now. Is it going to cross Center Street?
Well, actually, we have.
I know you were working on it.
We have already crossed Center Street. So when I first came, we were just beginning to develop the and we're calling them now the Dodge Campus, the Pacific Campus, and the Center Campus to identify the location. Because when we had the Dodge Campus as the North Campus and the Pacific Campus as the South Campus, then what were you going to call the one way south? And some of our students said maybe we should call it the Deep South Campus. They were always kidding me about that. But we did come up with some of our strategic thinking and working with Urban Design Associates that's also designing Exarban Village. It's a very innovative firm out of Pennsylvania. And as we were developing the current Peter Keywood Institute campus, as I said, they have gone from that one magnificent building to 10 residence halls, Scott Conference Center, Scott Hall, the housing with the front desk, the 3 incubator tech transfer centers. I mean, that's been a huge grow out, and we are just about out of space down there. We have earmarked another plot of land for additional housing, 400 to 600. But what is really the newest campus is that south of Center. We acquired Chili Greens from the Exarban Trust.
I was going to ask you about that. What role will that play?
Well, that's what we're planning out right now. There are 54 acres with Chili Greens, and then the foundation helped us acquire another 17. And strictly coincidental, the campus south of Center is 71 acres, and the one south of Pacific is 71 acres.
Interesting.
And we will be putting down there, again, the 3rd phase of what I'm calling round 2 housing. And we're working on the one on the Dodge campus, and then when we get down to the Pacific campus. Then we've got between that campus and Center Street and Exarban Village. It's going to be wonderful for our students.
That was another topic I wanted to talk to you about. First of all, though, let me, I'm sure that our audience knows what we mean when we say Chili Greens, because most of the people in Omaha have seen that big inflated building that they had there.
Well, that was the golf course.
Right.
And then the big Bloom building there, we have that up for sale. It just is not feasible for the kind of use. Our recreation, athletic people, intramurals all went down and looked at it, and we're going to see if we can't sell that. It's got more years of useful life, and then we were working on the design of where the third round of this Phase 2 housing would go up on the higher part of Chili Greens, since the lower part is in a floodplain. And then we've got a plan to put intramural fields, practice fields. We would have a football field, soccer, maybe 3 soccers to serve the community as well. And then there is talk of a convocation or gathering center that could perhaps down the road serve as our hockey venue, because everyone knows that hockey in the Quest has lost a lot of that intimate atmosphere that the Civic had, and most hockey arenas are 5,000 or 6,000, and of course the Quest is just so much bigger. Civic was 8,200, and so individuals are saying if we can get a public-private partnership to get a 6,000 to 8,000 multi-purpose arena, hockey, entertainment, and we don't even have a place on campus to have graduation and convocations. So that's really the excitement to come.
To what extent did your strategic planning efforts lead to some of this South Campus development?
Well, that's where a lot of it did come from, when you're looking at what you need to grow out, where you need additional classroom, residence halls, where you need space that interacts and works with the community, such as this arena that we're talking about south of Center. And the strategic plan does give us a good roadmap of what comes next. And each college has its own plan, as do departments and student affairs and business and finance. And then we have the strategic planning steering committee that meets monthly, and the advances instead of retreats twice a year, and the South Campus has been a big part of those discussions. And
at one time people were talking about a new business administration building on the South Campus. Was that still in the works when you were
It is footprinted. There's 2 academic spaces on the master plan south of the Peter Kiewit Institute, and one is for the business building and the other is for the expansion of the institute itself. And so those have remained, as I said, the land's used up, where we have footprints for the 2 academic buildings, and then we have footprints for more housing.
Now, did you have any input in the, we talked a minute ago, or at least you mentioned at the Exarban Village, did you have any input into the decision to develop that?
A lot of discussion. There's no question that many of the key players with Exarban Village have also worked with the university, and of course Walter Scott being one of the most notable who has helped make this possible. And almost my first or second year here, we started talking about the build-out of what was going to happen, some sort of public-private partnership south of our existing campus, and we even were talking about Chili Greens 8 or 9 years ago.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that. That looks like a wonderful development. It'll certainly be great for the students who live down there.
It will. And what we're needing to really work on now is what's going to be a good north-south transportation for getting students back and forth, and people. And the Exarban Village want to be very much a part of that, and whether it's a trolley or some sort of streetcar, that will help with the traffic flow.
Another facet of your 10 years here was a rather considerable change in the administrative structure of UNO. Could you tell me something about that?
Well, there's nothing like budget cuts. George Keller used to say 2 things that are most significant with strategic planning when he looked back 10 years later was to really get good planning done. Needed to be in good times, or it was in hard times when resources were short and you had to look at different ways of doing things. And several years ago, you well remember, and I think many of our listeners may remember, the university took some very tough cuts. And it was just not possible to keep the existing administrative structure. And we were having such significant cuts. I said, I can't ask programs, services to be cut if we don't cut administration. And so I took about $1.3 million out of administrative costs, and that went from 4 vice chancellors to 2. And so the structure we have now is a vice chancellor for academic and student affairs, and then a vice chancellor for administration. And so when we looked at that restructuring, part of it did come out of needing to be more resource conscious. But also we found it really has enhanced how academic and student affairs work together, and we've been able to have higher quality and less duplication. And then putting all of the public relations, outreach in with business and finance made sense. And some efficiencies have genuinely resulted. But it's hard whenever you're making that kind of structural change.
Well, I remember when the original plan came out, when we first had 3 vice chancellors, and the decision was made that the campuses should be the same, that all 3 campuses would have the same administrative structure.
I've never heard that.
Did you run it? You didn't run into that at all? Oh, that's interesting. I always wondered about that because...
well, actually, we've never had the same structure as the others when we had the 3 vice chancellors, because Lincoln had tended to have 4.
Yeah, well, of course, they
Kearney
had the agriculture, too, there, and that was different. But the central administration had completely changed from when they did it originally with President Varner. And
that was not an issue during my tenure here. The housing expansion was an issue in terms of what in terms of what the mission, role, and scope. And that's what I have to keep focusing on, that we aren't trying to compete with Lincoln or Kearney. Kearney is a residential school serving a key part of the state. Lincoln is the land-grant, and we're the metropolitan. And we all have students switching between and among.
Well, one thing I wanted to get to before we wind up here, and we've got a few minutes left, because you and I seem to have a common interest in international programs.
Yes.
That's something I've been interested in for a long time, and I notice that you have too.
That goes back to Michigan State days.
Right, I was going to ask you that. You had some experience in Egypt, I think. Yeah.
I'm very committed to international work, and very contrasting perspective between SIU Edwardsville, which did not have many international programs, and then coming to UN Omaha that had such mature programs of 30-plus decades of Ron Roskin's hiring Tom Gutierre to really grow international. And so it was very exciting to come in and be able to go back. And since I've been here, I've celebrated the 20th anniversary with Shizuoka, Japan, the 25th. And we signed the agreements in Lithuania and Latvia, and have gone back now for the 5th year agreements there. And this summer, I signed the 32nd sibling university with Innsbruck. And that is a management center of Innsbruck. And it combines both for-profit and not-for-profit. So you have social work there.
Yes, wonderful.
So it's a very different kind of...
Well, I've always thought that the more we can get make opportunities for our students to go abroad, the better off we are, and the more we can bring other students here to interact with our students on campus, the better off we are.
I've heard so many stories of, I just really now understand what the international exchange is about. And one of the faculty came back and said to me he'd never been outside the country, and that it changed his life going over there and working with the students. And of course the students are a key part of the exchanges, and we don't sign a partnership agreement unless there's going to be faculty, staff, student, or administration on each other's campus every year.
Well, I've personally enjoyed doing those things, but I've always felt that it was something that really serves students well.
And they get excited, and I've traveled with the concert choir and the jazz ensemble and the wind ensemble. And when you travel with students, you really see where those students can just interact. And of course, the students tend to speak English very often more than the administrators, because I would sometimes have to have a translator, whereas the students were bilingual.
I've done that, well, both ways. I've taken Japanese students on the Great Trans-Nebraska trip. I've done that 4 or 5 times, and was leader of it a couple of times.
Oh, great.
And that was always fun. But to see the changes in those students from other countries, specifically Japan in that case. But then also was a professor in the Nebraska semester abroad, which I just mentioned a little while ago, that where I took 14 students to Europe for a semester, and that
would be
completely changed their lives.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'll never forget, we were in Belgium for a while, and one weekend students wanted to go up to the North Sea, and this was early spring, and I said, you're not going to get much beach time on the North Sea in early spring. It's going to be darn cold up there. And I asked someone, why do students want to go, want to take that particular tour when there are so many other things? I said, well, you have to realize none of those students has ever seen the ocean before.
Yeah, that would be significant.
And that's why they were going. Yeah.
That would be significant.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a great experience for everyone. Well, you've done quite a bit internationally in places I've never been. Australia, New Zealand.
Oh, and that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I was doing the international keynote for what their coalition of urban metropolitan universities is. Ours, Coalition of Urban Metropolitan Universities, and I'm just gone off being president of that national association. It's probably one reason I was asked to do the international keynote in Australia. And I'd never been to Australia or New Zealand, so my Jack and I took some vacation, and we went to Sydney, visited the University of West Sydney, which is an international and metropolitan university. And I thought, well, we were going to spend 10 days in New Zealand, visited the University of Auckland on the North Island, and Christchurch on the South Island. They had no concept of metropolitan university. They said, well, we're located here. And they were fascinated by the difference in concept. And that's been one of the best experiences I've had, to have the international conference trying to grow the metropolitan movement. And there's only a handful of universities in Australia.
Now, have you followed up on that at all?
Oh, yes.
And they are
moving forward. In fact, West Sydney has joined our coalition of urban metropolitan universities. Auckland and Christchurch, they're the older, more traditional, single disciplinary focus, you know, in each department. I don't think they will embrace the engagement with the community and partnerships in the way that some of the Australian, Sydney and Melbourne. We ended up in Melbourne where the conference was and visited several of their metropolitan campuses. But it's just like you say, that travel brings so much to students and to faculty.
Yeah, well, we've certainly done a great job, probably mostly thanks to Tom Goodyear, but others too, in establishing those sorts of relationships. I have traveled all over Europe with Tom, initially, years back, trying to get things established, and I was so pleased with what we were able to accomplish there. Well,
we are one of the outstanding international campus programs. We're certainly known in all the associations, ASCU, and even the SALGI, the Land Grant Association, for what we do with international.
Yeah, that reminds me, I just got back from 3 weeks in North Africa and Tunisia.
Oh.
And that's a country we need to explore. I got to talk to Tom about that, because it's an Arab country, but it's a really laid-back Arab country.
I've never been there.
People don't carry guns in the street there like they do in many of the other places you'd think of. And so it's, and I was even served pork in one of the restaurants, which I couldn't believe.
I can't either.
Yeah, but it was amazing. A nice place, and nice people, and beautiful country. Yeah.
Well, maybe that will be a new avenue.
Yeah, let's hope so. I'm gonna talk to Tom about it, certainly. But so many things, that reminds me of another question I got to ask you. I know how committed you are to strategic planning and so on, but so many things seem to be just fortuitous. You can't plan for them, like our Afghan connection was that way, and
well, certainly after
and our
9/11.
connection with Israel was that way. It
with
just accidentally happened. And so how does that tie in with strategic planning?
Well, I think it ties in with our basic mission as a metropolitan university. We take advantage of opportunity. We're entrepreneurial. And I think the framework itself allows you to look at new options, and we've got this active planning process where you can get it in the system, let it be discussed at the college department level, and not miss on these opportunities. Because who would have thought our Center for Afghanistan Studies would have got such worldwide acclaim? Tom quit counting at 2,000 interviews after 9/11. While that was tragic, it really did open up a lot of doors. And as you're saying, the Besida excavations that are going on, a lot more dissertations could come from there.
That's right.
We cut the ribbon. I guess that was my first year too in Besida, and groups have gone back regularly until there's been so many problems in Israel that we've not been able to have as active of graduate students going over.
Well, we've got 3 or 4 more minutes left. I would, I don't think we can finish the interview without me asking you if you have anything you'd like to say about your final months as Chancellor here.
Well, and I was certainly going to make sure we covered that, because we haven't talked about athletics. And athletics is really the controversy that started in June, and it was the perfect storm, if you will, Jack, of North Central Conference unraveled the same week that the budget cuts had been announced in athletics, because athletics had had this growing deficit and had been handling it with year-in or one-time money, and it got to the point where simply some base cuts had to be made. And athletics determined which ones, and then there was a lot of fallout. And then you had a lot of concern, if the North Central Conference is going down the tubes, should UNO look at 1AA bringing football, it's all about football, up to the Division I level. And we already have hockey, so that would mean all sports would have to go to Division I. So when you've got budget reductions, you've got a Division I versus Division II area, and you have hockey who began to decrease the revenues it contributed back to all the other sports. It was started as a Division I sport that would help support the Division II. And with the move to the Quest Center, greater expenses, some drop in the season ticket sales because it just wasn't quite that same venue, you really did have a lot of dissatisfaction growing. And I would have certainly preferred to not leave the university with athletics in the situation that it was, but I am really pleased that it's moving forward. Our programs have continued to win. Look at the national championships we've had. Wrestling, going for a 4th year, and then you've had the women's soccer who are national champions, volleyball, softball. It's just been wonderful to have such a strong Division II, and I know that the AD and John Christensen are working on staying Division II with MIAA, which is the very thing Bob Dannenheier and I talked about 5 or 6 years ago. We knew that something could well happen to North Central, and so MIAA, that's the Mid-America Conference.
Well, I was pleased that at least there was some recognition that your decision to leave the university was a sort of selfless one, that you know, that your concern was really for the good of the university. Well,
when the World Herald keeps you in the newspaper, going from the sports page to the Midlands to the front page, top of the fold, it just wasn't good for the university moving forward.
I just got a sign saying it's time for me to wind this up and to thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And I want to say to our audience, thank you for joining us today. We've had a very pleasant visit with Dr. Nancy Belck, who served for 10 years as UN Omaha Chancellor. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of those who have made this history. This is Jack Newton inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.